What if the trash in your yard could become the most beautiful part of your garden? In this video, we're diving into clever, inspiring DIY ideas that transform waste, like bottles, drums, and old roots, into colorful garden masterpieces. If you're working with a small backyard or patio, you'll love what we've created. This is Revive Nature, where forgotten things find new purpose. Timestamps are available, so feel free to skip around. And if something sparks a question or an idea, leave a comment. If this speaks to you, don't just watch. Build it. Shape it. Make it your own. And maybe to you, I'm just another voice on your screen? But behind this content is a real story and a real family. This isn't just a video. It's a piece of my heart. Every like, every comment, every subscribe, it truly matters. When you hit subscribe, you're not just helping a creator. You're helping a dream stay alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for seeing me. In a sleepy corner of a tiny backyard, where the humming of bees softly mingles with the rustle of marigold leaves, an old idea takes root and blooms anew. Once forgotten and rusting in the corner of a shed, a collection of discarded metal drums awaited their fate. Their surfaces were dull, battered, and streaked with rain. But in the hands of a dreamer with a brush, those lifeless drums became petals in an eternal garden. Each slice of metal was carefully halved, then lovingly scrubbed clean and painted by hand. Not in one hue, but many, vibrant yellows like the marigolds dancing nearby, soft lavenders that echoed the asters, and warm coral tones that matched the fading evening sky. Petal by petal, color by color, the slices transformed into giant blooming flowers, each mounted along the wooden garden fence. Now, the drum slice flower fence brings life even in the quietest months. When snow has blanketed the earth and chrysanthemums sleep, the fence still sings of spring. It frames the tiny yard like an artist's canvas, bursting with hues that delight the eyes of passers-by and lift the hearts of neighbors who pause for a second look. Near its base, real blooms lean against their painted cousins, marigolds nodding in orange clusters, sedum catching drops of morning dew, and Japanese anemone swaying gently as if admiring the art. This is no ordinary border. It is a celebration. A tribute to creativity. A message whispered through color, that even trash can be transformed into joy. That beauty doesn't fade with rust, it only waits for someone to see it differently. And in the warm glow of a golden afternoon, beneath the shade of a sleepy pergola, it's easy to believe that fences, like flowers, can bloom forever. In the far corner of a humble backyard, Just past the garden bed where the marigolds bloom and the asters stretch for morning sun, lies a forgotten root, now reborn with magic. Once part of a mighty tree long gone, the root had weathered time, its bark hardened and twisted by seasons of rain and sun. Most would have cast it aside as mere debris. But for a gardener with an eye for wonder, it became the start of a fairy tale. The root was cleaned and shaped, its natural spiral preserved like a coiled secret. Then came the paint, gentle strokes of lavender, blush, and mint brushed over the grain, softening the bark into something dreamlike. Small doors were tucked into its folds, windows carefully carved, and miniature lanterns added as if fairies themselves might return at dusk. Around the sculpture, nature leaned in. Chrysanthemums in full blush leaned toward the spiral, as if drawn to its quiet power. Japanese anemones danced in the breeze, brushing up against the painted bark like curious children. Sedum and marigolds grew in tufts at its base, forming a soft skirt of bloom and color. Visitors call it the root spiral fairy corner, but it is more than decoration. It's a moment suspended in time. A place where imagination takes root and the ordinary becomes enchanted. In the hush of evening, when the sun slips low and the shadows stretch long, this corner feels alive, as if the earth itself is spinning stories through twisted wood and blooming petals. Children come with wide eyes, hoping to spot the flutter of tiny wings. Grown-ups linger longer than they planned, sitting on the nearby rustic bench, letting the scent of fall flowers and the quiet charm of the root calm their busy thoughts. Here, the backyard becomes a book with no pages, just colors, textures, and the deep knowing of nature reborn. And it all began with a root that refused to be discarded. There is a small garden by the gate, hardly more than a strip of soil that curves gently through a yard. Most would pass it by, seeing only its size. But here, in the hands of a dreamer, that curve becomes a river of light and color. It began with trash, plastic bottles, clear and crinkled, discarded without a second glance. Yet, in the soft hands of someone who saw their hidden flow, they became drops of water waiting to dance. One by one, they were cleaned, their labels peeled, their shapes reimagined. Each bottle was trimmed and stacked, then painted in hues of the ocean, deep sapphire at the top, fading gently into mint, sky blue, and finally white. They were arranged to mimic the soft descent of water, like a cascade frozen in motion, forever pouring between asters and marigolds. This is bottle cascade edging, a border that whispers of rivers long imagined and waterfalls captured in bloom. Real flowers lean toward its color, the proud heads of chrysanthemums, the dainty sprays of Japanese anemones, and the clustered joy of autumn sedum. Each petal seems to nod in approval, touched by the cool grace of a garden river made not of water, but of waste transformed. Children crouch beside it, running fingers along the smooth arcs of plastic waves. Neighbors pause to ask, "Is that really made from bottles?" and smile when they hear yes. It is not just decoration, it is a tribute to reinvention. A reminder that beauty can emerge from the most forgotten of things. And in the soft rustle of wind through flowers, with the sky reflected in painted plastic and soil warmed by the afternoon sun, the garden tells its story without words. That even in the smallest places, along a path, beside a fence, in a tiny yard, there can flow a river that never dries. A river made not of water, but of will, vision, and color. At the heart of a quiet patio, where grapevines curl and asters bloom, stands a bench unlike any other. It did not come from a store, nor was it crafted by trained hands. Its origins are humbler still, born from rusted metal drums, forgotten in a shed and given new life under the open sky. This is the DIY drum mosaic patio seat, and it carries within its curves the warmth of transformation. Once dented and dull, the drums were cut with care, their sharpness smoothed and their surfaces primed for paint. But not just any paint, this seat would tell a story in color. Tiny dots, hand-painted lines, and circular motifs blossomed across the surface, forming faux mosaics reminiscent of ancient garden tiles. Each pattern chosen not for perfection, but for joy. The blues told of oceans, the reds whispered of sunsets, the golds caught the light like autumn leaves. A cushion, sewn from scraps of floral fabric, crowned the seat, inviting, imperfect, beautiful. Now, when afternoon sun filters through pergola vines, it lands gently on the drum seat. Around it, marigolds nod and anemones reach out, framing the bench like a throne of petals. Visitors are drawn to it, not just to sit, but to pause, to sip tea, to read, to dream. Neighbors smile and ask, "Where did you buy it?" And the answer is always the same, "I didn't. I made it." From what others left behind. The seat holds more than a person, it holds meaning. It is proof that creativity is not measured in money, but in vision. That even steel drums, once used and discarded, can become vessels of rest and reflection. As evening comes and the flowers begin to close, the seat remains, a quiet celebration of color, of repurposing, of stillness. A place where stories are told, and where silence speaks through brushstrokes and blossoms. In a world that moves fast, this little bench says, "Stay. Just a little longer. Let the garden speak to you." Beyond the flower bed, where sedum clusters and asters sway gently in the breeze, stands a wall not of stone or wood, but of illusion. Here, in the heart of a tiny garden, plastic has learned to mimic bamboo, and trash has found elegance. It began with an idea, born from practicality and nourished by beauty. The garden needed a screen, a soft division between rest and growth. The builder had bamboo, but not enough. What they had plenty of were bottles, used, bent, clear plastic vessels from days gone by. Each bottle was cut, its middle trimmed, and shaped. A coat of muted green softened the glare of plastic. A line of beige added shadows. With careful hands, these transformed pieces were slid over poles, stacked like bamboo internodes, and fixed into place between slender real bamboo rods. The result was stunning. The plastic bottle bamboo wall rose gracefully from the soil, not stiff, but living. It caught the sun like rice paper, casting soft-edged shadows that danced across the chrysanthemums. It breathed with the breeze. It tricked the eye and delighted the heart. Neighbors marveled. "Are those really bottles?" they asked. And the answer always came with a smile. Yes, they were bottles once. Now, they are structure and story. Behind the wall, a quiet seating space waited. A bench made of wood scraps, a pot of anemones nearby, a tea tray resting on a stump. The garden wall was not just a screen, it was a conversation. A barrier that did not divide, but connected. Between nature and nurture. Between the raw and the refined. As fall deepens and the winds carry leaves across the yard, the wall holds strong, weatherproof and whimsical. Proof that what imitates nature can still serve her. That plastic, too, can be reborn, if only we give it purpose and place. Here, in a corner of a backyard no larger than a room, stands a testament to transformation. A plastic wall, pretending to be bamboo, and doing it beautifully. In a garden where stories grow from soil and shade, one structure stands unlike any other, a pergola not just dressed in vines, but crowned with roots that float like driftwood in a sea of sunlight. This is the floating root pergola planter, and it begins with a vision turned upside down. The roots were once underground, tangled, forgotten, dried by years of sun. But they were not lifeless. Their curves held the memory of growth, of storm and soil. With patient hands, they were lifted, cleaned, and brushed with colors, muted browns, mossy greens, and soft hints of rose and ivory, as if kissed by distant petals. Each root was suspended from the pergola beams with thick rope, tied in careful knots. From their hollows, trailing flowers now cascade, golden marigolds spill like sunlight, Japanese anemones sway like lanterns in the breeze, chrysanthemums rise in color like a second spring. Moss clings gently to the crevices, and tiny planters peek out between the roots, cradling herbs and fall flowers. Visitors stand beneath them and look up, not in fear, but in awe. For here, the natural order has reversed. Roots no longer reach down, they rise, becoming wings for blooms. The pergola itself becomes more than shade, it becomes sanctuary. Beneath its hanging roots, a wooden bench waits beside tea-colored bricks. The air smells of earth and blossoms. The rustle of leaves is interrupted only by bees and whispers. This installation turns the idea of growth on its head, literally. It teaches that roots, too, can be lifted. That what once supported can now be supported. That decay and driftwood can become sculpture and bloom when given a sky to hang from. In the evening, the low sun turns the roots to golden lace, and the flowers into floating jewels. It is then that the pergola becomes not just a structure, but a suspended garden, a gallery of grace and gravity defied. Here in this small corner of the backyard, framed by blossoms and shadow, beauty hangs from what once buried deep. And the garden, ever wise, smiles quietly. In the center of a tiny garden where stones curve in quiet symmetry and flowers bloom in layered chorus, something bold rises, a drum, once dull and industrial, now bathed in light and color. They call it the Color Drip Drum Garden Center, and it did not begin in beauty. Once, it sat behind a shed, forgotten, rust-bitten, hollow with echoes of oil and time. But then came paint, thick, unapologetic, joyful. Poured not in control, but in surrender. Red slipped over the edge, followed by sapphire, lemon, mint, plum. The colors didn't compete, they flowed. They became tears of joy, stripes of song, cascades of second chances. The drum, now sealed and reborn, was filled with earth and crowned with growth. From its center burst marigolds like golden fire, asters in soft lilac, and sedum thick with succulent promise. Japanese anemones leaned outward as if to drink from the painted rain. It did not try to hide what it was. The dance remained, painted over, but proud. The shape was still that of a drum. But its presence was new. It no longer held fuel, it held life. Color. Hope. Children called it the Rainbow Flower Tower. Adults marveled at how something so industrial could sing so sweetly among the blooms. Bees, it seemed, had no preference. They buzzed from petal to petal as if the paint were scent, the steel were stem. The drum stood in the center not because it demanded attention, but because it gave it. It held the garden together, visually, emotionally. Around it, stones circled like quiet applause. Nearby herbs, once unsure in their place, now thrived in its orbit. At sunset, the light would catch each drip, turning paint to flame. And when night fell, and the sky turned navy, the drum became silhouette and memory, a reminder that beauty is not always grown. Sometimes, it is poured. Boldly. Freely. In this garden, surrounded by tiny yards and whispered dreams, a single drum reminds all who visit, what's thrown away can still bloom. What's forgotten can still shine. All it takes is color, and a little courage. A garden is a place of edges, between soil and stone, between bloom and path. But here, in a quiet patch behind the house, the edge does not divide. It dances. This is the twisted root garden edge, and it does not follow straight lines. The roots were gathered slowly, one by one, from forest walks and fallen trees. Each one curled like a question mark, shaped by wind, time, and hidden stories beneath the earth. They were not chosen for perfection, but for personality. No two the same, no pattern repeated. Each root was cleaned with care, its bark softened by brushing, and its texture revealed like sculpture. Some were left bare, others painted gently, just enough to catch the sunlight, a touch of moss green, a kiss of ochre, a whisper of aged wood. Like veins of the earth drawn above ground, they came together to form a natural border. Now they wind through the garden like wild poetry. Along the flower beds where chrysanthemums bloom in blushing coral, where sedum thickens like autumn lace, and where anemones tilt gracefully toward the breeze, the roots hold it all. Not tightly, but lovingly. Children see dragons. Artists see brushstrokes. Gardeners see life returning in another form. And those who rest nearby feel something deeper. That nature does not end when it falls. That even in decay, there is design. That roots, symbols of grounding, can rise to frame beauty in new ways. The edge curves beside a stone path, welcoming feet and eyes alike. It invites you to wander slowly, to notice the contrast between the gnarled wood and the soft petals it guards. No plastic. No straight cement. Just the elegance of chaos, shaped by intention. When dew clings to the roots in the early morning, it looks as if the earth has shed tears of joy. That the garden itself is proud, not only of its blooms, but of the way it holds them. And so, this twisted root edge is more than a boundary. It is a thread between what was and what grows. Between wild and tended. Between forgotten and found. In a garden corner filled with laughter and petals, there stands a fence that smiles back. Not made of wood alone, but of playfulness and pastel dreams, brought to life by humble bottles and a dash of wonder. They call it the Bottle Bunny Fence Decor, and it all began on a spring afternoon with nothing but trash and imagination. Old plastic bottles, bent and forgotten, were gathered from recycling bins. Their shapes were familiar, but their futures were blank. With a pair of scissors and pots of pastel paint, the transformation began. Bunny ears were cut from the tops, noses were dotted with pink paint. Tiny eyes, some hand-drawn, some googly, peeked beneath gentle curves. Some bottles wore floral decals, others hand-painted hearts or gingham bow ties. One by one, the bunnies found their place along the fence, tucked between slats, perched on rails, peeking from flower pots. Soft pink, mint green, sky blue, and lavender, they became part of the bloom. The marigolds giggled around them. Asters leaned in, as if whispering secrets. Japanese anemones seemed to nod their approval. Children stopped to count them. 8. No, 9. Wait, that one blinks. It didn't, but imagination made it so. Adults, too, were charmed. The bunnies brought smiles, stories, and a sense of welcome. They made the garden feel alive, not just with plants, but with personality. And beneath their playful charm lay a quiet truth, that what we throw away can become part of joy. That even plastic bottles, shaped by soft hands and open hearts, can turn a plain fence into a parade of happiness. The bunnies stood through wind and sun. Rain brought sparkle to their ears. Autumn leaves curled around their bases, and the fall flowers bloomed brighter beside them, as if inspired by the whimsy. By night, with fairy lights strung along the fence, the bunnies glowed softly, their faces catching the golden shimmer like garden guardians. Here, in a tiny space where space is tight but joy is wide, a simple fence becomes a gallery. A celebration of creativity, upcycling, and innocence. A reminder that gardens aren't only for growing plants, but also smiles. At the edge of a garden where lavender sighs in the wind and bees hum old lullabies, there rises a tower, not of stone or marble, but of memory and bloom. They call it the vintage drumflower tower, though it began its life in utility and rust. Once, these drums stored oil, paint, and practicality. They were meant for industry, not poetry. But time and tender hands have a way of rewriting purpose. Each drum was cleaned, its past peeled away like old wallpaper. Then came paint, soft, deliberate strokes in hues of another century. Dusty rose for romance. sage green for calm, ivory for grace. And along their surfaces, vines were drawn, roses curled, and tiny scrolls of gold traced the edges like the frame of an old photo. Stacked one upon another, they reached waist height, 3 levels of vintage charm, now crowned with flowers instead of lids. From the top burst chrysanthemums, vibrant as firework petals. From the middle, sedum spilled with the richness of ripe figs. At the base, Japanese anemones arched like dancers mid-bow. But this tower was not just visual, it was emotional. It stood as proof that age is not decay, and that even steel can be soft if dressed in petals. Visitors often paused here longest. Children looked up, wide-eyed. Gardeners took photos. Elders smiled, as if the tower whispered of days when gardens wore lace and letters came scented. Around its base, creeping time softened the lines. A nearby iron chair offered a place to sit and listen, to bees, to wind, to one's own thoughts. The tower did not shout for attention, it welcomed you in, gently. In autumn, its flowers glow like sunset. In winter, it stands regal and silent, waiting to bloom again. And so, from trash and time, from metal and memory, rises a beacon of bloom. A flower tower not rooted in the soil, but in the soul of the garden itself.